Hello, everyone. um, Thanks for the great presentation. I'm gonna, pick on, what he said during the presentation. The blended approach, partners, integrations, and all that. But from a perspective more on the product and how the product will help your business grow. First, just a quick intro about myself. So my name is Bruno Pedro. I'm Portuguese, and I've been working with APIs and integrations more or less since 2004. Probably built, hundreds of integrations with different types of APIs, as you can imagine, like SOAP, REST, and so on and so forth. Today, I'm again, as Ulf said himself, this is not a technology session. So I'm going to present you something from the business point of view. So what I'm bringing today, what I propose is talking about integrations from a product point of view. So introducing notions like the whole product, the augmented product, or the integrated product, and then how to measure, how your API is being used, how the integrations are actually being used, and if your business is growing and what you can do about it. Who here in the room has already, heard about the terms whole product, augmented product, and so on? Anyone? Perfect. So otherwise, I would be wasting your time. So the whole product is actually, a definition that has quite some time. So this gentleman here, Regis McKenna, he's a marketer. He's actually responsible for launching the first Apple computer. And he says that basically the whole product is any product that you can think about, but with all the different, let's call it, features that makes the product appealing to the end consumer. So in other words, when you buy a product, you don't actually buy the product, you buy what you want to do with the product. So a good example with this is with something very mundane, such as bread. So when you go to the bakery and you buy a loaf of bread, you might want to eat the bread alone, but you usually think about the bread not on its own. You think about a sandwich. So your whole product would be the bread plus butter, cheese, whatever you like to eat with the bread. So my point being here is that there are very rare occasions where people actually buy just the product itself, just so they can use it alone. So they use it in a much broader context. So if you want, you can look at your product as being in the center of this consumer experience, and then the whole product will be the blue circle, where there are other smaller products from your point of view, from your angle, that are circulating around your products, and that some consumers might use some of them, some consumers might use others, and so on. But the point here is again that your product doesn't live alone from a consumer point of view. You need to coexist with something else. In other situations, your product might be one of these smaller products that makes some other products whole. So you don't exist alone again. So you need to think about your thing in terms of a wider and broader context. So how do you get from your simple product that does one thing very well to a whole product that might help the consumers do what they want? So another marketer, this time Philip Kotler, he created this new concept called the augmented product. So the augmented product is, in his own words, all the things that you need to do in order to go from your simple product to the whole product. So whatever you need to create or to implement, after you do some market research or after you understand what consumers want, whatever you need to do, that's called the augmented product, or product augmentation if you want. So the ways that you can do that, there are numerous ways. So one way is, obviously, you can spend some time and you can build all the features that you think your consumers might want yourself. So you'd have your time investment. So your company would spend some time building, all the needed features so that the consumers would look at your product, but they would feel that your product would actually fit their own needs. Another option is you can always buy, all those features that your product doesn't have, and then use, out of the box and just incorporate those features into your product. Or if you're talking about, other types of companies, you can buy other companies. So I don't know if you're familiar with a recent deal in the API industry. So Oracle buying API, for instance. Why did they do that? You might ask. Because they wanted to incorporate API's features into their own product. So they must have done some market research, and they understood that the consumer would need those specific features, so they bought them. So what usually, most situations, what happens is, the average company will spend some time trying to develop something on their own, investing time, and also some time buying other products or buying some features out of the box so they can incorporate them in their own product. In any case, there's some deal of, spending here, whether it's time, money, or, time, which can be translated to money. There's some deal of spending. Another option here, you might be thinking now, is, okay, so instead of developing myself or spending money myself buying it, I might just, try to partner with other companies. And it happens sometimes. So sometimes companies create partnerships so they can offer certain things together, and that new thing becomes a new product from the perspective of the consumer. But partnerships, also have their own, let's call it challenges. So you obviously need to manage the partnership. So usually partnerships require a relatively large amount of legals, take some time to happen, might also involve some development and time spent. So the next phase, and this is a new term coined by myself, this is what I call the integrated product. And the integrated product is the product augmented through, connecting to different APIs from third-party applications. So instead of developing it yourself or buying the features that your product needs, or even partnering, the hard way, you will integrate with an API your product with other different products. So how does it work? So if you remember the previous diagrams, so you had all the other products and your product in the middle. So in this case, you build a new layer, which is your API. So I'm sure you're all familiar with APIs. From this angle, it looks a little bit different. So the API will be like, a layer in between your product and all the other existing products in the universe or in the mind of your potential consumers. So, and this is important. This to think about, what consumers want, not building an API just for the sake of just having an API. So, and after you have an API, you can think about, different products or different applications, third-party apps, having different integrations, right? So those red lines are like the integrations. And I use the color red on purpose because the integration always creates some friction. So the friction exists sometimes on purpose, but the friction exists because, it might take some time for developers to integrate with your API. The API might have issues. So there's always some friction there. And the friction might result in unanticipated costs, like support requests, you might have, to upgrade your infrastructure and so on and so forth. But in the end, it might also result in potential new revenue from each of these integrations. So the question now that you might have is, how do I know, like, which one of these integrations is actually being used the most, for instance? So how do I think about generating more revenue from these different sources? That is one of the questions that I try to address in this presentation. So that obviously would be the first question, like, which application is making the highest number of API calls? So not just looking at your logs or at your analytics and saying the API globally is performing in so and so way, or the number of API calls is growing or is getting slower and so on. Trying to answer questions like this one, or which app is producing the highest error rate? Why would I want to know that? Because if they are, producing a lot of errors, it means that probably they should be paying, or I should call them and try to understand why they cannot, have the API, the integration working perfectly. Another question might be, how many applications are using some new feature that you just launched last week? So you launched a new feature on the API, and then suddenly your boss comes to you and says, so, we spent 3 months developing this new feature. Is it being used, or is it not being used? Is it producing errors? Are people happy with it? And so on. Some other question, like, what is the least used path and method? So the least used operation. Which applications are still using it? Why would I want to know this? So I could know if I could deprecate a certain operation. So if I have, one of the operations being used by, let's say, one application out of 1,000, I might just cut that specific operation, and that would spare me some time and money because I don't have to support it anymore. Yet another one, like, are there specific apps producing high error rate? If so, I might want to do some proactive support. So I might want to call them if they are paying, or I might want to try to convert them into paying customers, for example. So the point here is, what I'm trying to do here is, I think you already understood, is after you know and understand your market, you should make the exercise of brainstorming what are the metrics or what are the questions that you need to ask in order to understand how your business relates to your API in the first place. These are just examples. You might have your own very, very specific questions. Because if you don't ask those questions, you will never know how the API is influencing the business. You'll have one API, you'll have your revenue at the end of the month. You might be able to say, oh yeah, since we have the API, the revenue has been growing. Great, but how? How exactly? So that you can replicate, so that you can grow even faster. So what can you measure in order to be able to answer questions such as the ones that I was presenting? So the two simple basic things I would measure, and again, this is from a business point of view. This is not from a technical angle. So the number of API calls and also the error rate. So I would put some metrics in place so that I could know at any given time how are these two values evolving over time. And then I would create 3 dimensions so that I could group by any of those, or group or filter. So the method, the path, so these two create the operation, and also the response code. So I believe that with these 2 metrics plus the 3 dimensions, I might be able to answer most of those questions, right? But I still cannot answer questions related to specific consumers or specific applications. So I know information about the API, but in general terms, but not specifically if I want to go, deep into one application or consumer. So what I would add here, another dimension, which is the consumer ID. So, and this can be obtained easily from OAuth. I'm sure some people here in the room might know that very well. So the consumer ID would identify the user, the end user, on behalf of whom the calls are being made. So as an example, if you are using a mobile app that connects to an API, you, the user, the end user, you would be the consumer ID. So with this information, I could, pinpoint exactly and say, okay, I want to know for this particular consumer ID, how is, the trend in the number of API calls. Or let's say, I want to know from all the consumers from Sweden if the error rate is growing or if it's going down for some reason. But I still cannot get the information specific to one of these integrations. So that is possible if I add yet another dimension, which is the app ID, the application ID. So with the application ID plus the consumer ID and the metrics that I was already describing, I can answer questions like, give me, the trend for the number of API calls for a specific partner since last week. Or I want to know all the apps that have more than 1,000 consumers. And I want to see how the number of API calls for a specific operation is trending. So you get to be able to understand all these specific things related to the API. So obviously, this other value, the application ID, can also be obtained from OAuth 2. So on the OAuth 2, when a user does the authorization, it does the authorization for one specific application. So the question now is how to measure, right? So after you write down all the potential questions you want to ask, and after you're able to identify how to get the information you need, which tools can you use to measure or to instrument, if you want, those metrics? So the first three, this is not a exhaustive list. There are plenty more tools out there. The first three are what I call API-specific products. So these are API gateways or API management tools. So MyShape has a tool called Galileo that does exactly this. So it doesn't go as deep as I was going, but it gives a pretty good information about how your API is behaving. And again, behaving not only from a technical point of view, but also from a usage point of view. 3Scale does the same thing with its analytics feature, and Apigee the same thing, basically. And then you have two other products, and here you can use those to push any information you like. So you can go to your API codes and write anything and just push any information. You could even add, a dollar value if you wanted to any of those metrics. So you could ask the question and say, which integration is creating the most revenue at the end of the month? So these are the Google Data Studio. I'm not sure if you're familiar with. So this is a kind of Google Analytics on steroids and New Relic Insights. So with any of these, I would start, if you are already using an API gateway or API management platform, I would explore that and try to see if they have an analytics feature. If you're not happy with that feature, I would try some other tool, generic tool that would help you push or instrument the data that you want to push. So in summary, and because we're running out of time as well, so by now you should remember, the concept of the whole product, the augmented product, and also the integrated product, and how your API can actually help you create the product that the consumers really want. And then which questions you want to ask to understand how your business is evolving and how your API is actually participating in that growth. And that's it from me. Thank you.